December 30th, 2024. Just weeks after giving birth, Tatiana Schlossberg, granddaughter of John F. Kennedy and prize-winning journalist, was gone. Her mother, Caroline Kennedy, carried grief the world would never witness. The private funeral was not just secret. It shut out even family. It ended in tears that no public statement could explain. What happened inside that snow-covered chapel, and why the letter found afterward broke Caroline, changes how we remember America's most famous family. This is where the story really begins. Tatiana Celia Kennedy Schlossberg was born on May 5, 1990, in Manhattan, the first daughter of Caroline Kennedy and Edwin Schlossberg. From the start, she carried a famous name, but she chose a quieter path. At the Brearley School, then Trinity, she stood out for her sharp mind and dry humor, not for her family legacy. Yale University drew her next, where she studied history and led the Yale Daily News, shaping campus conversation with a steady editorial hand. She went on to earn a master's degree in American history at Oxford, focusing not on her own family's story, but on the roots of American identity itself. Tatiana turned away from politics and the Kennedy spotlight, drawn instead to environmental journalism. Her bylines appeared in the New York Times, The Atlantic, Bloomberg, Vanity Fair, and The Washington Post. She launched a newsletter called News from a Changing Planet that translated climate science into plain language. In 2019, her book Inconspicuous Consumption won first place from the Society of Environmental Journalists. Colleagues described her writing as witty, clear, and unflinching, a rare voice that made the invisible costs of modern life impossible to ignore. Praise came from across the field. One editor said that Tatiana explained the hidden damage in everyday systems, making climate consequences real without ever preaching. She was working on a book about the ocean when illness interrupted her plans. In every professional milestone, Tatiana built her own identity, one defined by curiosity, precision, and care for a world beyond her own family's shadow. In May 2024, just hours after welcoming her daughter Josephine, Tatiana's world began to tilt. Nurses drew routine blood work as part of her postpartum care. The numbers did not add up. Her platelets had dropped far below normal, while her white blood cell count had surged. At first, doctors looked for common culprits, an infection or a reaction to delivery, but the bruises that appeared across her arms and legs told a different story. Within days, Tatiana could not lift her newborn without feeling winded. She was moved from the maternity ward to hematology for urgent tests. A bone marrow biopsy confirmed the diagnosis, acute myeloid leukemia, a rare and aggressive form. The odds were not in her favor. This type of leukemia is seen in only a small fraction of cases, especially in young mothers, and it moves quickly. Tatiana was 34, with a toddler at home and an infant in her arms. The shock landed while her husband George, a physician, watched helplessly as colleagues explained the prognosis. Her parents, Caroline and Edwin, took turns caring for Edwin, her firstborn, while George stayed by her side. The hospital room filled with the sounds of monitors and the quiet cries of a newborn, a stark contrast to the life she had imagined just days before. The diagnosis arrived like a storm, sweeping away any sense of safety. Tatiana's life shifted from the rhythms of new motherhood to the relentless schedule of cancer treatment, her future suddenly measured in lab results and transfusion counts. George Moran spent his career moving between operating rooms and research labs, first at Yale, then Columbia, then one of the country's top hospitals. He knew the protocols by heart, but nothing in his training prepared him for watching his wife become a patient. He wore his hospital badge even on days off, sleeping on a folding cot beside Tatiana's bed, charting her symptoms in a notebook when he could not sleep. The hospital staff recognized him as both a colleague and a husband, and they made quiet allowances, letting him review charts after rounds, arranging calls with specialists at treatment centers from Boston to Houston. When standard chemotherapy failed to bring Tatiana's blood counts back to normal, George began calling trial coordinators late into the night, asking about experimental drugs and immunotherapies not yet approved for general use. He gathered abstracts, sent emails to researchers, and pushed for compassionate use protocols. At home, he answered questions from family. But at the hospital, he spoke only in numbers and probabilities. Tatiana's room filled with medical printouts and post-it notes, but her privacy remained guarded. George and Tatiana refused to share photos beyond a small circle of friends, understanding that even hope felt fragile. The hospital, aware of George's credentials and his desperation, fast-tracked paperwork and made space for his vigil. He fought for every possible day, refusing to accept statistics as fate. The corridors he once walked as a doctor became a battlefield, each shift measured by the weight of his wife's survival. Tatiana's doctors recorded a change in her blood counts that summer. Chemotherapy, harsh and unrelenting, seemed, for a time, to be working. Her hair began to grow back in fine, pale strands. Appetite returned. She was able to sit up, to hold Josephine in her arms, to watch Edwin toddle across the hospital room. For 2 months, the numbers on her chart crept toward normal. Nurses started to hope. George, always cautious, allowed himself a brief smile when Tatiana asked for her favorite soup. Family members took turns visiting, careful not to bring in germs, careful not to let themselves believe too much. The mutation in her leukemia, though, was not idle. In late autumn, a new cluster of abnormal cells appeared in her blood work. The disease had adapted, finding a way around the drugs. Tatiana's skin bruised at the lightest touch. She grew tired, then exhausted. On December 20th, during a routine transfusion, Tatiana's heart stopped. Alarms blared through the oncology wing. Staff rushed in, performed chest compressions, and brought her back, breathing but unresponsive. George stood frozen, his hands still stained with ink from the night's medical notes. For the next 10 days, Tatiana drifted in and out of consciousness. Her family gathered at the hospital, waiting for a sign, but the remission was gone. The only thing left was time, measured now in hours, not months. For 10 days, the hospital room became a world of waiting. Tatiana drifted in and out of consciousness as the calendar turned to the end of December. George rarely left her side. His voice was quiet and steady, even when she could no longer respond. Caroline sat close, holding her daughter's hand, reading softly, sometimes just listening to the sound of the monitors. Family members arrived in pairs, offering brief words and silent prayers. On December 30th, 2025, as the city outside moved through another winter morning, Tatiana Schlossberg died. The room fell silent. There was nothing left to do but say goodbye. Snow muffled the city as mourners gathered at St. Ignatius Loyola on January 5th, 2026. The service remained unannounced, the doors watched by a handful of security and old friends. The guest list was tightly held. Robert F. Kennedy Jr. was not among them. The absence spoke louder than words. Inside, the casket was white and unadorned, set at the altar beneath the vaulted ceiling. Caroline Kennedy sat near the front, her hands wrapped around her granddaughter. Toward the end, George Moran stood and read aloud from a letter Tatiana had left behind, addressed simply for Mom. Each line pressed the air from the room. After the final prayer, family and friends walked in silence to the burial site where Tatiana was laid to rest beneath a tree overlooking the Atlantic. The wind carried the sound of the ocean beyond the snow. George carried her wedding band home, wrapped in tissue. A onesie, size 12 months, lay folded in her suitcase. Colleagues recalled her clarity and wit. Al Gore called her work essential. An unfinished book about the ocean remains on her desk. Private grief endures long after headlines fade. For the Kennedy family, loss is no longer history. It is the present tense of memory and legacy. In every quiet farewell, we are reminded, even the most public names face the same silent questions of love, mortality, and what remains. Share your thoughts below.